Hello, everybody. Can you see my slides? Yeah, cool. The headline on the company name says Redcliffe Capital, and I just wanted to clarify what that is. Redcliffe Capital is one of my companies, and Fintricity is one of my other companies. And the branding on these slides are Fintricity slides, so I thought it'd be easy just to give you those rather than trying to rebrand them all as Redcliffe slides. I'm going to talk really in sort of 25 minutes about how big data fits into the context of actually how business is transforming. And the title is obviously Be Digital or Die. And for me, the biggest challenge around every business is to transform themselves to be digital, but actually more than that, transforming their business models. So what I'm going to talk about is really focused on some of the characteristics of that, and data fits in there, but some of the things like blockchain. So anybody heard of what blockchain is? Anybody who's heard about blockchain, put your hands up. Okay. Anybody doing projects with blockchain technology? All right, cool. That's fine. So the reason why I put blockchain in is Elliot, who organizes the content, said, you need to put some blockchain stuff into the presentation. So, okay, fine. So one of the areas we're working is around blockchain. So I'll talk about what that is. So this is one of my favorite slides. I've had this slide in my decks for 7 years. Right? Have anybody seen this slide before? Yeah. So I've had this slide in my decks for 7 years. The reason why it's still in there is because it's still early around the application of data in most businesses. And that pretty much still applies. You know, if what we're seeing is that the journey around the use of data in businesses has been focused on technology. The technology teams have spent large amounts of money on Hadoop clusters and other kinds of technology, and actually the business hasn't leveraged off it. And what we're seeing this year is really some of that starting to happen. People going, okay, well, we built this tech stuff over here. How can we use it? And the business is starting to ask these questions, saying, well, how can we actually use data in our businesses? And it, as I'm sure all of you know, it's not about technology. The use of data is really about how can the business understand the use cases of the use of data and be able to transform the business using it. So I like that. And then the next slide is around digital transformation. Everybody heard of the phrase digital transformation? Anybody who hasn't? Good. That's good news. The bad news is, what does it actually mean? And for me, the important thing around the meaning of digital transformation is really focused on business transformation, around reinventing your business and your business model. It's not about marketing. So I was talking to a very large pharma company about 3 weeks ago, and he was head of digital transformation. And he was focused on marketing and how websites are going to work. That's not a small challenge for a large pharmaceutical company. But they were focusing on the interface into the customers and the suppliers and everybody else. But actually, more than that, it's a wired digital transformation sits around the data agenda, and it's the overarching theme that people need to think about. So all of these things produce data. I like to put this slide up not because I like to talk about technology, although I am a technologist. It is the fact that all of these things are impacting every business in some way. It's going to impact the business in some way. The challenge has been that what we see frequently is nobody really knows how and why and when. People see this stuff, and you probably read lots of articles about it, but actually saying, well, what's 3D printing going to mean for me? So I'm not talking about pharma intentionally, but because it's in my head. I was talking to somebody, not in pharma, but somewhere else, and they were saying, you know, what we're thinking about. That's right. It was somebody in the NHS, actually, interestingly. And he was saying that what we're planning to do is have 3D printers in hospitals where we can then 3D print the medicine that's needed for that particular patient at the time they need it. That was mind-blowing. For me, that's mind-blowing. If you could print a medicine in... Now, how do you do that? There's a whole bunch of stuff to make that happen. So part of that is around digital, part of that's around transformation, part of that's around data. So if we take all of these things in context, how the hell do you leverage off the data that these things throws off? How does that fit into your business? And this is just an example of the kinds of data that companies have. This is a marketing-focused side, which is focused on different types of customer data that exist. And if I asked you how many of your organizations have aggregated all your customer data into one place so you can actually do more analysis with it, I bet you most of you say we haven't. We've got silos of data everywhere. We've got customer data over here. We've got marketing data over here. We've got CRM data over here, etc. So being able to aggregate data across the whole business and bring it together is absolutely one of the key things that every business needs to think about doing. And this is not just about internal data, it's about external data, open source data that you can get. There's huge numbers of sources of open source data that you can bring into the business, which combining with your own data could generate a hell of a lot of value. So if we take things holistically and say, well, how does data fit into our business? How do we leverage off it? This is just an example of the characteristics of the capabilities that people need to think about. The primary one for me, and that's what I spend a lot of time, my time doing, is innovation. Is helping organizations think about where is our business going to be in 1, 3, 5 years' time, and what do we need to do and to get there. So if you're not thinking about that wherever you are in your business, absolutely think about that. Think about, yes, this is a big data conference, but actually big data is only a piece of trying to deliver some value around business. And thinking about things holistically really makes a difference. And the bottom right quadrant is obviously the disruptive technologies from the previous slide. Being able to talk about change and business change and cultural change. Being able to say, I want to use data in a process in which I didn't do that before, or I use data in a spreadsheet, but actually need to be a lot smarter about how that data is collected and used. So, I'm going to add some other color around this and the fintech industry and what's happening around that, and then also talk about some of the ventures, some of the new economy companies that are emerging. So, anybody know who said that? Anybody know? It wasn't the banker. Any ideas? Does it say? It said Bill Gates. Oh, shit, it says Bill Gates. Sorry, I need to change that slide. Sorry. Okay, so here's Bill Gates. Yeah. Sorry, I'll have to fix that. Hassan, it's your fault, mate. You've got to fix that slide. My colleague's here, I can blame him. So the interesting thing is that if you take it to any business, any vertical, any marketplace, there's going to be fundamental shifts in how those industries work, and banking is one of them. You know, banking and finance have huge amounts of data. Do they really use any of it? Not a lot. Not if you talk. How many of you work for banks? So if I asked you that question, how effectively do you use your data? Yeah, you know, so you, right. So if we take on the right-hand side some of the technologies I've talked about, and we take on the left-hand side new business models and operating models that are emerging. In the financial services industry and in other industries, you're seeing marketplace models, and a marketplace model is really focused on not owning any assets, and I'll talk about some marketplace businesses in a second. The important thing around marketplace models is they're driven by data. So if you know Funding Circle, or do you know Funding Circle? You know, they're just lending money to businesses, but what they're doing is using data analytics to be a lot smarter and build better risk models that the banks can't do. And people like Santander have given them 100 million to lend through them because they can't do it themselves. And the balance sheets are messed up. That's in a whole other conversation. The important thing is these marketplace models are emerging. They're driven by data and analytics. They're driven by not having to worry about balance sheet and everything else that banks worry about, and be able to take that market share. Platform model is an interesting one, and the next slide I'll talk about platform models. Banking as a service is an element of how in financial services industry, an organization like a bank can transform to be part of the future. So, platform models. Platform models are, unfortunately the word platform is quite ambiguous. People have different words, people use the word platform very loosely, and my challenge is that, unfortunately, depending if you're talking to technologists, a platform means technology infrastructure. Yeah, if you're talking a guy who builds websites, a web application, say, my website is now a platform, right? There are some very specific characteristics, and this is a picture taken from a Harvard Business Review article. If you want the slides, email me and I'll send you the slides. But at the bottom it says Sangeet Paul Chowdhury, and has written a book on platform scale. And have a look at it, because what it talks about is how businesses need to transform to be platforms. And platforms are places where you build an ecosystem that allows interactions between parties in that ecosystem. And producers and consumers in this picture aren't about a consumer in this man in the street, but actually consumer of a service or or in the production sense, similarly, it's a producer of a service. And a user can be both. So in Airbnb as the example, if I give Airbnb the example, you can be a renter and provide input into the ecosystem by providing a rating or a comment. But you also can rent your own place out. So if you think about all the different companies part of that you could build into an ecosystem, again, it's all driven by data. It's all driven by bringing the data and organizing it well. And this is just some of the key characteristics around what platforms should look like and the kind of things that you need to build into platforms. And if you look at almost every one of those, it's about using data and analytics to build a network effect. How do I bring ecosystems and partners into a place where I can provide not an intermediary, but I can provide capability that all of the ecosystem gain value. So these are some of the well-known platform companies which I'm sure you know of, right? The important thing to remember, they're disrupting the existing market. This is the important thing about the platform economy. They're disrupting existing markets, right? It's the obvious one. Uber is obvious. The thing to remember about Uber is not a taxi rental company. Everybody thinks it's about taxis. It's not about taxis. It's about data that they're collecting on every single movement of a thing. And at the moment, it's about a person. They've just started, Uber Eats has just started in the UK recently, if you know Uber Eats. It's moving a thing from A to B. And they're collecting data on every element of that particular transaction, from initial engagement to the traffic when the driver moves around, the way the driver drives, the way the passenger behaves in the car, et cetera, et cetera. And they're collecting that data every day on every single journey, which helps them optimize and use that data to do, for example, logistics. If I had another journey which was similar, I can direct the driver or direct the thing that's being moved around in a different way. So think about Uber as a company that's going to compete with DHL and Royal Mail, not about a taxi company. But the key thing here is they collect every piece of data possible, and they're using that pretty effectively. Everybody knows about Facebook. Yeah, the one thing I would say about Facebook that people don't really understand or talk about a lot is Facebook's social graph, and a social graph is basically in relationships that you have, so your friends of friends, your friends of friends of friends. They have the world's largest social graph, i.e. they know a hell of a lot about us and our families and a whole bunch of stuff, which they use to generate revenues. Right? They use that data, and if you ever bought ads on Facebook, you'll know. You can actually target right down to the individual who in a particular city, in a particular region, in a particular set of interests very, very precisely. And they'll tell you how many people they estimate there are because they've collected the data on it. So, I won't go to all of them, but you get the gist. You get the gist that I'm talking about. They're all driven by data, but the important thing to remember is data is driving the transformation of their business model. It's driving the transformation and the change. They're fundamentally driven by data and how data fits into actually making more money or improving the customer experience or whatever. So that's the thing. That's the essence of what they're doing. So going back to a bit about marketplace models, there are 4 quadrants in there. To build marketplaces is hard. To build liquidity is hard. But if you get the data right, that helps you a hell of a lot. Right? It's as simple as that. So I won't go through this, but just looking at the model of how that would work. Just a simple model of how that would work. So, coming on to blockchain. I want to try and explain blockchain in 2 minutes. Because one of the things to remember is, again, the data stuff sits around it, and the ability to be able to use data effectively and use some of the characteristics around blockchain is one of the ways that we're seeing the application of use cases which have never been solved before in a different way. So the example I give is this one, which is around car leasing. It's very simple. And so everybody understand blockchain? Because if you understand it, I won't go through it. Is it worth me doing this? If you don't want me to do it, put your hand up. Cool. Right, good. So if you look at a traditional value chain, car leasing is a bit, it doesn't matter. It's a simple thing. But the important thing to remember here is you have different parties along the value chain. You have different sets of data that they have. They all have to reconcile with each other across the value chain. They all have to move data between themselves. They have to trust each other in the value chain. So, you know, what happens is you have instruments like letters of credit and bills of lading and other kinds of instruments where banks are right now, where they provide an intermediary type service to say, well, I don't trust you as a buyer, you don't trust me as a seller. Let's use an instrument, an intermediary like a bank, to provide trust and lower risk so that we'll get paid and you'll get your goods. So one of the characteristics of a blockchain is to say, well, who actually owns that particular car, in this case, a car, as it moves along the value chain? Who owns it? Right now, the ownership is basically a piece of paper somebody has, right? What you can do on the blockchain is record the fact that the title of the asset is stored on the blockchain to say, I own this. And when you pay me the money, the title transfers on the blockchain and the money gets paid. So a manufacturer selling his car, distributing his car through a dealer, that is quite paper-driven and very, well, it depends on the dealer, but you know, there's a whole bunch of issues around actually moving the car and the paperwork and everything else between where it's manufactured. Say, BMW manufacture cars in the States and they bring them here. All the custom stuff that has to go on, all the logistics stuff has to go on, all the payment stuff that has to go on to actually get a car from A to B. So if you imagine the reconciliation that the people have to do and the paper they have to fill in to try and actually make that move, it's quite a burdensome and quite expensive and quite risky. And if you go across the value chain, it's very similar. So if you go number 4, where the lessee is, and the lessee basically is paying a fee to use the car to the leasing company or the dealer, and there's money transfer between, so I'm lending you the car, you need to pay me money, and that money generally will flow across the value chain to potentially, even potentially the manufacturers providing the finance for that car. So right now, what happens is a whole bunch of steps in that. There's different databases in there, and they're all trying to pay. The money moves around very in a disjointed way. So what you could do is use what's a concept called smart contracts, and probably haven't heard of what a smart contract is. But let's simplify it and say it's a way of encapsulating rules that are executed on the blockchain to enact a particular activity, like I'm paying some money. So you have a contract, the leasing company has a contract with the lessee that says you need to pay us £500 a month. And that person pays £500 a month. So you can use a smart contract to execute that all across the value chain. So everybody gets what they're supposed to get. Now, if you know about blockchain, people talk about blockchain in the context of Bitcoin. This is not about Bitcoin. This is not about payments on using the Bitcoin blockchain. This is a completely separate thing. There are new types of payments mechanisms emerging using blockchain technology, but this is nothing to do with Bitcoin. So what you get really in the new world is this kind of distributed model, a decentralized model of being able to have a place that has the data around that value chain in one place. Everybody has a copy of that data. So the transaction, the title, the payments. And everybody can reconcile easily because it's in the node that everybody shares. So what happens is you don't have to do reconciliation. You don't have to do title transfer across different pieces. You don't have to try and do data conversion and integration. You can use a blockchain and blockchain technology and a blockchain solution around enabling people to move data across the value chain, be able to get paid quicker, be able to trust assets, and actually disintermediate companies like the banks. So you don't need a bank anymore. Why would you want to pay bank 3% on a letter of credit when you can actually provide the trust in the network? So decentralization and disintermediation is one of the key characteristics of what blockchain is going towards. So if any of you are in the intermediary business, be scared, because it's going to change in the next few years. I won't go through this, but this is just a financial services example about where some of the use cases are for the application of blockchain. The guys who are in banks may be familiar with some of those. But let's just say the characteristics around blockchain technology, which is a longer conversation, are solving things that have never been able to be solved to scale and to a business case. And these are some of the ones in financial services that are now being considered by a whole bunch of banks and others. So going back to the big data thing, always like to when we do stuff around big data, it's really saying, okay, how can I apply data to my business? And Any of you from investment management? Nobody from asset management? Two people. Okay. So the guys who are from asset management may recognize these pictures. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. The reason why this picture is up here is if you look at the value chain of how an asset manager works, and you've got the horizontal functions underneath. This is not untypical of any organization. The important thing is that in every part of that value chain in the horizontal business, there's data being generated. And being able to figure out actually where you can apply use cases which use the data and then think holistically about how do I bring that data together is what to think about. So these are just some use cases that I've got. I'm trying to remember some of them. Let's have a look. Sorry. So I'm not going to read through. Some of these may be obvious, some of them maybe not. The important thing is they're use cases which help the organization serve their customers better or be operationally better or hire better. That's the important thing. So when you're talking about data, hopefully most of you are from the business. It's that mapping between the business and what the use cases are and knowing where to start and helping the technologists understand how I want to use, how data can apply. Now what we find is actually the data and technology guys don't talk the language of the business and vice versa. Technology guys talk about Hadoop and other stuff. And it's hard work, right? Sorry, Tom. Nobody cares about technology really, Tom. Right? So what I'm saying is, unless you have that mix of people where the business is driving the use of data in the business and bringing the technologies along, that's the gap that we see all the time. So unless you can fill that gap, actually getting value from data is going to be hard. So I'll just reiterate the slide. One of the other elements that I always like to do is when you're talking about transformation, big organizations, the big consultancy firms and the big accounting firms like to spend millions and millions doing big transformation programs. If you look at the new economy businesses and how they work, what they do is they use Agile and Scrum. They use build, measure, learn cycles, if you know about build, measure, learn and the lean startup. That's how they iterate and evolve their business all the time. The Uber guys, that's what they do, right? They figure out a problem. They think, how can we solve it? They've got the data layer underneath. They build it very quickly. They test it very quickly. If it works, they go, right, how can we scale it? Otherwise, they kill it or change it. So this agile operating model of a business driven by data is absolutely the way the business needs to transform. And I'm not underestimating the complexity because it is hard, right? This is hard work. This is hard work. How do you transform a business that does waterfall with gate stage processes to an agile business? That's bloody hard work. I'm not denying that, but that's what every organization has to go through. That's the kind of model that people have to think about. So, if you want to disrupt your business, I think the first thing to think about is how do you map a business strategy? How does a data strategy fit into the business strategy? And thinking about actually what does that look like? Thinking about how you can transform your business, use Agile as a model, as an operating model to build stuff quickly, and that's hard and painful work. We've seen a lot of organizations just ignore the stuff that's going on. We don't care. We're fine. We're a large insurance company or a large pharma or whatever. Nothing's going to we're just going to carry on. I think that attitude has got to change because I cannot believe how quickly things are changing. It's mind-blowing how quickly now the acceleration of things that are changing. So thinking about holistically what does this mean and finding projects that you can deliver to move that vision. And the final one is absolutely disruption is going to be a way of life. You probably, some of you in large organizations won't see disruption in your organizations, but around your organization with other companies doing it. If you're not thinking about how you can be disruptive and you can change your business, then go work somewhere else. Unless you're happy doing what you're doing. If you don't want to disrupt, fair enough, right? It's fine. But if you do, and you have to have the ability to convince your management that we need to be disruptive, we need to be more innovative and change our business. So that's it. Thank you very much. And look at that, 25 minutes. Thank you very much. Any questions? Come on. Ah, there we go, one here. Go ahead.
What's your view on scalability issues with blockchain and how can that be a problem for certain use cases where there are people?
It's all rubbish. It's scalable, it's fine. It depends what you mean by scaling blockchain. What do you mean?
What do I mean? That every single part, every node that belongs to a blockchain has to have a copy of all figure transactions?
Yeah, it's fine. No, don't worry about it. So the technology is developing. The technology is developing to meet the need of the scalability, right? So people are solving scale problems in different ways. Network scale is not a problem, really. Transaction processing scalability is a problem around some of the blockchain technologies. Yeah, but actually right now, how many real live applications of blockchain need 100 transactions per second, 1,000, 10,000 transactions per second? Not many, not any, right? So they don't. You tell me an example right now. If you can convince me there's an example right now that I need to do 10,000 transactions per second on the blockchain, I'll go, great, fantastic. Build something to fix it. I just don't see it. When all the work we're doing, we don't see it. It's not a problem that people come. It's a problem that's been emerged from the Bitcoin blockchain because it takes 12 minutes or something to persist a transaction on the chain, right? That's where it comes from. The reality in industrial applications, they're nowhere near doing that kind of volume of transactions. Nowhere near. And there are some technologies out there that are building it. Sorry, for the camera and the voice, it was, what about the scalability of blockchain? Sorry. So I'm happy to debate it with you, happy to, but the problem will get solved. But it's not a problem we see as an issue, as the kind of stuff that we're working on that's actually saying, you know, actually I can't scale now at the moment, I'm going to stop doing it. It's not something we come across. Any more? Yes, go ahead.
Credit scoring, how does that work? You've got an example of that?
For blockchain 4?
For credit scoring.
Longer conversation. But ultimately, the ability to aggregate data and have a immutable score that stick on the blockchain, which then is distributed, that's the kind of use case that I'm talking about on credit scoring. Pardon?
Immutable scoring.
Immutable. So storing the score on the immutable, that's the point of it, is draw an immutable transaction on the chain. One last one. Anybody? Go ahead.
I just, maybe it's just the language barrier, as it were, but did you say intermediary be scared or intermediate be scared?
Intermediaries.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody who's intermediary.
Okay. Because I work in media and I was like, why? Wait, what?
No, not media, but there are use cases in media, but that's another conversation.
Okay.
But intermediaries.
I'll think about that one afterwards.
Intermediaries, yeah. I mean, disintermediation is something this kind of stuff really takes away because the fundamental thing around blockchain is lots of businesses have intermediaries, parties who interface between two parties who want to do business with each other because there's no other way of doing it. And they charge, some banks, in the banking case, charge a lot of money just to be the intermediary.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the main advantages of blockchain in the first place, but
Yeah.
okay.
Cool. Thank you very much.